We're Gen Alpha influencers. Of course, we are obsessed with skincare.
Things that I hate, people like, okay, I don't know how to say this without sounding so self-absorbed, but when people get views off of me.
What is going on with Gen Alpha students and their poor behavior at school?
They don't care.
We're Gen Alpha influencers. You're 4.
Gotta keep those wrinkles away.
We've been asked before our thoughts on discipline. I don't know what is discipline.
They do not care about authority. It's wild.
Perhaps we need to have a serious conversation pretty soon about whether or not it is healthy for young people to be plugged into the internet the moment that they are able.
I think it's going to be equally interesting and heartbreaking to see like the psychological effects that we see later down the road of using social media at this age for Gen Alpha.
We all love making fun of young people. It's almost like a rite of passage when a new generation is labeled to separate ourselves from them by putting them on a lower pedestal than ours. We pat ourselves on the back and congratulate ourselves for being better children than the current lazy, entitled, and self-serving youth. While we now have research showing that for the most part this isn't true, and that the kids these days mindset comes from our own memory bias of our childhoods, there is still growing concern for the newest generation. Gen Alpha, with their unique struggles specific to being born between 2010 and 2025, may be causing permanent damage to their development. Between growing up chronically online and surpassing the level of coddling that the participation ribbon generation was raised with, Gen Alpha is now facing a label of their own, a label that may be forever imprinted on them as the most narcissistic generation yet. I went into this video hesitant to make such claims because, for one, I don't love labeling large groups of people, let alone the group of people that my own children are in, but the more I've researched, the more concern I've grown for these kids. So let's dive into it and try and decode the symptoms of growing up Gen Alpha. Have you guys been keeping up with Gen Alpha influencers? It is both terrifying and fascinating.
Hey guys, it's Johnny with a G. Get ready with me for school. Next up, my glow recipe firm serum. Gotta keep those wrinkles away. So, I got this new moisturizer from Glow Recipe because they love me. It's been a rough day, guys. Of course, I need to moisturize my face.
Outfit of the day. So this is from Kendra Scott. I don't have any earrings in. This is from Lululemon. Before I get more comments from people being like, that's not a real Lululemon jacket. You can't afford Lululemon. Which, first of all, why do you care? Okay. Second of all, this is Lululemon. I just took the hair tie out.
If you're wondering how this happened, it of course all started with the iPad kids. In 2010, when the iPad came out, parents were quick to adopt it as their new parenting hack. A 2011 study found that 39% of 2 to 4-year-olds have direct access to digital media, just a year after the iPad's inception. In 2011 to 2013, the percentage of children under 8 that were using digital media increased from 38% to 72%. And as kids grew up and grew out of iPads, they needed the next upgrade, which was of course the smartphone. A 2019 review of NPR found that over half of children have a smartphone by the age of 11. These smartphones of course came with all the bells and whistles that you get from your iPad, with the constant entertainment, but with the convenience of being able to bring it everywhere. And kids have been getting smartphones earlier and earlier every year since they came out. Some kids are getting smartphones as early as age 5, and I know of some schools struggling with cell phone issues in the classroom as early as grade 3. And with this access to smartphones, children are using video sharing apps like TikTok and YouTube at even earlier ages. These kids are spending much more time on technology than any other generation at the same age. They found that 65% of those ages 8 to 10 are spending up to 4 hours a day on social media.
I don't know what's in the water right now, but all of the educators I know are experiencing this collective shift around one particular issue. It's phones. The levels of addiction range from mild to, this is not an exaggeration, students who are on their phones scrolling every class the entire hour, the entire school day. Whatever's happening in the classroom, if you are on your phone, that's more interesting than whatever we're doing. So even if you're kind of in and out, no, your phone is what's dominating your mind. But I think what's worse for me is the social element. It is so weird and disturbing to just see kids not talking to their friends. I want you guys to talk to each other. goof around, be kids. I almost want them to act up in the traditional ways where they're just Haha, talking, joking, passing notes. Time to do something. What are we gonna do?
Despite the minimum age for using these platforms being 13, we know many children under 13 are on these apps. And that's how we've gotten the Gen Alpha influencer, because while there is a minimum age of 13, there is no regulation preventing children from downloading and using these apps. And not to mention that these companies don't want to keep children off their platforms, because the earlier the children join, the more likely they are to build those scrolling habits that they'll take with them into adulthood. And in my opinion, the worst offense of them all, which is preventing anyone from shutting down these Gen Alpha influencers, is that a lot of these kids have parent-run accounts, which allows them to get around the rules. I just don't understand why parents would think that this is a good idea, a good thing to do for your kids.
I think it's about time someone said it. I think that parents who have entire TikTok accounts and Instagram accounts where the entirety of the content is them filming their like babies and toddlers need to stop, because like what the actual am I watching? You're telling me as a parent, especially the ones who like their entire life is this family TikTok account, you're telling me one of the main sources of income in your house is videos of your baby? I feel like a lot of them don't really have much say in the matter. They're so small and they're just doing what their parents are telling them to.
Now, I could make a whole video on the negative repercussions of having children on social media, but today we're talking specifically about the narcissistic repercussions. The reason children should be kept off social media is because prepubescent and pubescent kids are the most vulnerable at this age. During this time, their brains are still malleable, and the neuron pathways that they make during these years will stick with them for the rest of their life. Children are, of course, very impressionable. That is how they figure out what path they want to take and who they want to be. And with that, they often copy whoever they see to be the most accomplished or having the highest status. Older Gen Alphas are forming their habits now, and these habits have impacts on children's aspirations. One survey found that today's children are 3 times more likely to aspire to be a YouTuber than an astronaut. This is, of course, because they're primarily seeing influencers being the most accomplished in society, and so that's what they want to be as well. During the time of life when kids are finding their own identities, Gen Alpha influencers are hijacking their attention and retraining them to aspire for their version of success. Since succeeding on social media requires primarily a focus on the self, especially when these children are too young to have any life experience that would allow them to offer anything of value, these children will continue to turn inwards to try and reach the same level of success that these Gen Alpha influencer role models have reached. And so these young people focus obsessively on themselves and their public image. And even if you don't want to be an influencer, you're still dealing with the increased social comparison from being on these apps, which increases your self-focus as well. Now, if you are a well-balanced person who has the capability to compartmentalize all these effects from social media, then you can get away with minimal negative repercussions. The problem is, really only adults can do that, not even all of them, because your brain is fully formed. Children's brains are just too sensitive to prevent these negative repercussions, that this obsession with the self can make you prone to narcissism. Research shows that higher amounts of social media use predict higher levels of grandiose narcissism. This includes time spent on social media, frequency of posts or tweets, number of friends/followers, and how often participants post pictures of themselves on social media. As well, in a 2018 study, researchers tracked 74 participants aged 18 to 34 over 4 months and quantified their narcissistic traits. They found that participants who posted large quantities of photos and selfies showed a 25% increase in narcissism. It's a cyclical issue too, where the more you're online, the more prone you are to narcissism, and the more your narcissism grows, the more likely you are to be chronically online. One study found that young adults with grandiose or vulnerable narcissism were at higher risks of TikTok addiction. If we don't cut out these Gen Alpha influencers, whether that's through government agencies shutting down the content or parents taking control of their children's access online, we will continue to see children's brains being warped to see success in narcissism. This portion of today's video is sponsored by Ulike. Did you know that you can have 90% of your leg hair permanently removed in just 4 weeks from a 10-minute home treatment? Well, when I heard about that, I said sign me up. Today I'm partnering with Ulike and their Air 10, which does just this. I've always loved the idea of getting my legs and armpits lasered because being a mom especially, I don't have time for the maintenance of shaving. I've just kind of accepted that I'll always be a little prickly, but I've never actually gone through with it because I didn't want to spend the time to go to a clinic. I didn't want to spend all the money for all the sessions at the clinic. And that's why I'm so excited about the Ulike Air 10. It is a at-home laser hair removal treatment that takes me 10 minutes to use, and in 2 weeks you already see results. After 4 weeks, like I said, you can expect to see 90% of hair removed, and then you just finish off their 12-week plan to get the rest. The Sapphire Air 10 uses intense pulse light technology to remove hair while maintaining the health of your skin. The Air 10 specifically has been upgraded to use 2 pulse lamps instead of the industry standard 1. This means double the light source, increasing the treatment area by 18% and providing a total energy output that is 65% greater than any of their previous models. It comes with 4 power modes that you can adjust from the side here. Fast mode, best for maintenance and small touch-ups. Normal mode, best for removal of finer or normal hair. High mode, best for coarse, thick hair. And SHR mode, which is a high intensity treatment to remove stubborn hair. My favorite part is that it is completely painless. I was a little nervous, with it being laser hair removal, but there is no pain. Its unrivaled skin protection from ice cooling action means that you just get a cold sensation while you're using it. Between the dual light and the SHR mode, the Air 10 can handle even the thickest hairs. I like to use the SHR mode on my armpits and then just the regular mode on my legs, and I found that works for me. Another thing I really like about it is that it has a manual mode for small areas like your armpits, where you just press the button and it activates the laser. Or you can use the auto glide mode, which is for larger areas like your legs, where you hold it down and it starts to automatically send the laser as you just glide it over your leg. To me, this really seems like the best option for hair removal because you're getting an at-home treatment that's painless, quick, easy to use, and is a one-time, lifetime purchase. The Air 10 can be used on most of your body, including your legs, your bikini line, your armpits, your arms, your upper lip, your one chin hair that you got from giving birth to 2 kids. Love that for me. So if you want to try out the Ulike Air 10 for yourself, check out the link in the description, and you'll also get a 90-day no reason return or exchange. Thank you so much to Ulike for sponsoring today's video. Now let's get back to our video essay. The use of smartphones and the overall internet by Gen Alpha expands to more than just the consumption of Gen Alpha influencers. Between video games, messaging apps, streaming platforms, and more, children are growing up with their eyes glued to a screen. A survey from Pew Research showed that in the smartphone and social media era, nearly half of the nation's teens say they are online almost constantly. Specifically, they found that overall screen use among teens and tweens increased by 17% from 2019 to 2021, growing more rapidly than the 4 years prior. On average, daily screen use went up among tweens, ages 8 to 12, to 5 hours and 33 minutes from 4 hours and 44 minutes, and to 8 hours and 39 minutes from 7 hours and 22 minutes for teens, ages 13 to 18. Now, there have been arguments that say that this increase in screen usage isn't all bad because it can be used for educational reasons like schoolwork or for messaging platforms that of course connect people together. The problem that is rarely brought up is that the time spent on these screens takes away the time available for other activities that children need for proper development. Specifically, children are not getting enough in-person social time with others, despite living a life centered around social apps.
Millennials were fine because they had flip phones. They weren't online all the time. Gen Z is not fine.
I agree with him that perhaps we need to have a serious conversation pretty soon about whether or not it is healthy for young people to be plugged into the internet the moment that they are able to be plugged into it. Is that beneficial for their education? Are they learning? I don't know. But as a millennial, I remember peace. I remember that. I remember peace growing up. I remember not having the noise, the constant noise of connection, of screens, of being able to just grab for something to look at it when you were feeling a certain way, of observing large groups of people that were being present because they had no choice. And you could go days without looking or seeing a screen. There was a slowness and a peace to that life. And millennials experienced it when they were young. And then it was slowly chipped away as they grew into adulthood. Yeah, I mean, I knew that peace. I knew that peace when I was like 8, 9, or 10. And now it doesn't really exist anymore. You have to find ways to carve out peace because there's just so much noise all the time. So are they fine? I mean, I don't really think anybody is fine, but it's different. They're not fine, but it's different. Yeah, I don't know.
Prior to the 1990s, the time that children and teens spent with their friends stayed fairly consistent. And then when we hit 2010, we saw a massive drop-off of the amount of time that kids are spending with their friends daily. This trend of self-isolating is confidently said to have been caused by the introduction of smartphones and other technologies taking up the attention of children and teens. This is because the decreased time spent with friends follows the same timeline as the increased usage of social media platforms. And as we were seeing the time spent with kids on the decline, then of course we got hit with the pandemic, where this social trend downward got accelerated. While children were only forced to stay locked down for a few years, like I said earlier, children are very sensitive to the habits they make in their youth, and this sets the path for their habits to be self-focused. We're now finding that children haven't rebounded or regained the social lives that they had in the early 2000s. And this is what's leading children to having fewer and fewer friends and feeling lonelier than ever. Not surprisingly, this isolation is having an impact on children's social skills, which is showing a rise for the potential of a narcissistic generation.
I feel like because of the internet, Gen Z and Gen Alpha do not know the power of words. Just because you cannot see a person's face and the pain that registers on their face when they hear horrible things written about them on the internet or spoken about them does not make their feelings any less valid or real. If you are a parent or someone that has influence over Gen Alpha or Gen Z, please remind them the power of their words.
One of the most important things kids are supposed to do in their youth is to learn social skills and foster emotional development. During adolescence, friendships are vital. They help young people forge a sense of independence and identity while teaching them valuable skills like compassion and empathy. While children do maintain some friendships through online platforms, they need face-to-face interaction to learn the skill of empathy. Dr. Michelle Borba, who wrote the book Unselfie: Why Empathetic Kids Succeed in Our All About Me World, said our children become very plugged in around the year 2000. It's very hard to be empathetic and feel for another human being if you can't read another person's emotions. You don't learn emotional literacy facing a screen. You don't learn empathy and face-to-face connection if you're looking down and texting. You don't learn emotional literacy with emojis. Raising empathetic children is important for them to become well-adjusted kids, but it's just as important for them to become well-rounded people in general.
I've been seeing a lot of teachers on here talk about how they can tell in their classrooms who the iPad kids are because they're inattentive, they have a lot of problems with focusing. And I just want to take it one step further and tell you that that's not only going to be a problem with attention later in life, but also personality as a whole. You're going to raise an apathetic child if you are a chronic iPad kid. And that's because in developmental psychology and cognitive neuroscience, we have this term called theory of mind. And that's a developmental necessity when you're a child that allows you to understand how you interact with your environment and how it interacts back with you. If you're stuck in front of an iPad for your whole adolescence, there is no way that you are going to develop your place in the world and your interactions with other people, what's appropriate, what's not appropriate. And at the end of the day, if you don't develop it, it leads to different psychiatric disorders and also just a complete lack of empathy.
Children do better in school, work, and life when they have the capacity to be empathetic. Research shows that empathetic children are better adjusted socially, more likely to rise above peer pressure, and are less prone to aggression or bullying. They tend to become effective communicators and find it easier to form bonds with others. Empathy also empowers children to understand to cope with their feelings and the feelings of others. As you can probably predict what I'm about to say, a lack of empathy leads to an increase in narcissism. At extreme ends, empathy and narcissism are like oil and water. Highly narcissistic people lack empathy, and genuinely empathetic people aren't narcissistic. For this reason, raising empathetic children who have a healthy, balanced sense of self and feel connected to others is a kind of psychological insurance policy we can invest in as therapists, parents, caregivers, teachers, family members, and neighbors, nurturing the next generation of global citizens. If we continue to let our children stay face down in screens instead of experiencing people and the real world, then they won't have the capacity to learn empathy during these developmental years when they learn the social skills they will use for the rest of their lives. One of the biggest ongoing concerns that people have with Gen Alpha's upbringing is the parenting style millennials have chosen to use, which is of course gentle parenting. There has been an uproar of opposition against gentle parenting because while it may seem wonderful on paper, acknowledging and responding to your child's emotions, staying calm, and showing mutual respect, it doesn't seem to be putting out the best kids.
Oh my god! Did my son just curb stomp your son?
My baby!
Fig Newton, come here, buddy. Okay, buddy, first of all, are you okay? Let's do a check-in. Let's do a full body scan. Hey, Figgy, we don't do that. But that was a really good throw, buddy.
Will you tell your kid to stop throwing things?
Oh, we don't believe in the word stop. Only go.
Millennials gravitate towards this style of parenting to try and break the pattern of some toxic parenting techniques that many Gen X and millennials had to endure growing up, things like spanking and screaming. If you watch my videos, you know that I have talked about gentle parenting before and that I stood behind it saying that gentle parenting is good for kids, but since then I've learned more and I have more concerns. The problem that seems to be rising is that while gentle parenting is good for our children, many millennials are not in fact gentle parenting, but permissive parenting. I didn't think this was the case before because I saw so many surveys showing that millennials are gentle parenting, not permissive parenting. But many of these surveys were just millennials saying that they gentle parent and not actually proving that they are gentle parenting. But since then, more surveys have been taken from these parents practicing gentle parenting, saying that 40% of them don't actually know what they're doing. And many of them have said in gentle parenting, they felt exhausted, overstimulated, and hanging on for dear life. Like I said in my previous video, if you are correctly gentle parenting, it is great for you, it's great for your children, but there is a slippery slope towards permissive parenting if you aren't careful. If you haven't looked into gentle parenting, the idea behind it is to approach your kids with respect and empathy, to offer choices rather than making demands, to give space to your children's feelings and emotions, and to avoid losing your cool in frustrating situations. And that's why it's not hard to see why it's become such a popular parenting style. But while the outline of gentle parenting may seem clear, the day-to-day application can become blurry. Having natural consequences instead of timeouts seems like a great idea, but what are the consequences for, say, biting a sibling, or refusing to get your shoes on, which will lead you to be late for an appointment? Parents are finding that real-life application of gentle parenting isn't straightforward enough for their day-to-day, despite wanting to do their best for their kids.
So I can always tell permissive parents, like out in public, I'm not judging them, but I always just notice it when they give in. It is really like the classic, no, we're not going to buy you a toy today, or no, you have to sit in the booster seat, or have to hold mommy's hand in the parking lot. And the kid will be like, no, or whatever. I want what I want. And the parent will be super sensitive and not tolerate the kid's negative emotion and give into it. And I'm not judging that at all. I didn't like when my kids had negative emotion either. But because I'm a psychologist, I was always more afraid of conditioning them to not tolerate their own disappointment by giving in. I thought that was interesting.
Unless you've previously thought through the exact natural consequence for each scenario prior to the event happening, it's really hard to think on the spot of what makes sense right here when you could just give them a timeout. Annie Pizzala, an assistant professor of psychology, said that the problem is that it's not straightforward to describe or explain what gentle parenting says these parents should do instead. From our study of 100 parents, we found that parents who identified as gentle usually note 3 things. They regulate their own emotions in the middle of a conflict and try to name their child's emotions. You look angry, do you feel angry? They try and give their child coping skills like sitting with their feelings, and they give affection. There is a lot of hugging it out. When we asked about a time when their children misbehaved and how they handled it, many parents said, I asked my child if they needed a hug.
One thing these parents emphasize is giving their child a voice. Many parents that I've talked to have felt disempowered by their own parents, or their authority has been undermined by them. And that can lead to them feeling like no one's going to listen to them anyway, so what's the point? Or not believing that they can be in charge and instill their values and set boundaries with their kids. And that can lead to an imbalance of control where the child feels like they're in charge and they can set the rules and expectations in the home. And then that can lead into school as well. These kids will be bossy, defiant, argumentative, disrespectful. When they become adults, they can often be self-centered but dependent in relationships. They could be demanding of others but then fail to follow through with responsibilities and obligations on their end. and that often results in a very lonely life.
In the process of moving away from traditional discipline and towards gentler strategies, we find ourselves exhausted from the emotional weight required to gentle parent. In authoritarian parenting, you just react and shut down the situation and emotions, while gentle parents have to go through the whole routine of acknowledging feelings, calming the situation, coming up with applicable consequences in real time, and holding your ground despite the backlash that your child will give you.
Gentle parenting is really hard, especially when you were not gentle parented. You are doing the work to reparent yourself, so you have that stress of breaking generational trauma, and then on top of that you have to parent in a healthy way. So I'm sitting there, and while my son's about to dart into the street, I'm like, okay, what do I say in this moment so he doesn't get scared and he can learn because his limbic system isn't freaking out? Oh baby, stay in the grass. And that interaction, although it was 2 seconds of his day, was 40 minutes of my brain power. So I come home, my son won't nap, and you know what I did? I went into the pantry, I closed the door, and I screamed as loud as I could, and then I crushed my soda can instead of throwing my phone through a window and breaking the glass. So it's just really hard to be a parent, and especially nowadays because knowledge is power, but burying your head in the sand seems really nice right about now.
This mother gave a great depiction of what it actually feels like to try and hold those boundaries as a gentle parent. If a kid is screaming for a third cookie and a parent is trying to avoid a response, like, "You won't ever get dessert acting like that," or "Eat another bite of broccoli and then we'll see," the other choices are these. Give the kid the cookie to make the screaming stop, not great, or explain that you've already discussed the rules about dessert beforehand, because that's what gentle parents do, obviously, and affirm your child's disappointment while holding the line, even as the storm rages for minutes or even hours. Meanwhile, good luck having a much needed conversation with your spouse who you haven't seen all day, or making a phone call. I'd hand over the cookie for peace, or maybe yell, "Stop crying," or "I'm canceling Christmas," but that's just me. Of course, I'd pay the price. It's harder to hold the line later when you've already caved. The gentle way is better, but very, very hard. It's no wonder parents often choose the easy out and unintentionally indulge their kids. Another example is Hannah, a single mom of 2 boys at ages 6 and 9, who says she met with a school psychologist because she was noticing a lot of disrespect at home. The psychologist said the kid needed boundaries. Hannah readily admits that she might be a tad permissive as a parent. She has a hard time holding the line with screen time on school nights and gives in to stop the mind-numbing negotiating her kids have perfected. When Hannah's kids misbehave, she finds that talking about what they're feeling or taking a few deep breaths in the other room doesn't seem to help. And while she's convinced that her kids don't walk all over her, she knows she isn't consistent with expectations and limits. She's getting tired of the escalating backtalk, throwing, and ruthless negotiating. She tells me she wonders if she's been too soft. No one wants to usher a generation of entitled jerks, but are well-meaning gentle parents doing just that? So what does this mean for the children when gentle parenting is taken too far? When we overindulge every last emotional experience to the point where we become the regulators for our children's emotions? Well, funny enough, just like the neglectful, abusive, and authoritarian parenting style that the boomers grew up with, which has been shown to produce narcissism in children, permissive parents are just as likely to produce the same narcissistic children. Differing from the cold and aloof parent, the second type of parent to create narcissists was described as using their child as a direct source of self-esteem. They saw their children as extensions of themselves and therefore played up all their strengths while downplaying all of the child's shortcomings. And we are already seeing this start to affect the older end of Gen Alpha. It seems like everyone's talking about how horribly misbehaved and self-entitled they are. I keep seeing these videos of teachers saying that they're actually scared of Gen Alpha because they have no respect for authority and just live according to their own rules.
They do not care about authority. It's wild. They are so aware of their power and what they want and what they don't want, and they are not afraid to share it. They don't buy into the argument that this is good for you, so learn it.
In the current school system, they've found a lack of empathy and emotional intelligence, demonstrating feelings of entitlement and self-absorption, struggling with self-image and social comparison, and a lack of moral compass make for a future generation of narcissistic bullies. They are spurred and protected by their parents who set a trend to continuously rescue their child, or to completely ignore that their child is the wrongdoer. Parents who exhibit power in their own behavior and attempt to bully other parents set an example and become poor role models to their own children.
This is one of the most disturbing things I've read in a while. A post on r/teachers has gone viral titled, "It's going to get worse isn't it? This person has been teaching for 14 years, and they teach grades 9 through 12 English Language Arts, or ELA. They start out by saying that all grades seem to have in common a one-and-done aesthetic, meaning all students get a chance to improve their grades with revisions, but fewer than 1/3 even try. And then the parents complain when the kid doesn't have an A, even though the kid refused to do revisions, didn't address the prompt, and had tons of spelling errors even though it was a digital assignment. He says the parents just stare stone-faced and say, but you assigned a one-page essay and he turned in a one-page essay.
And this was only amplified by the pandemic, where parents bent and twisted to their children's desires as they tried to navigate at-home learning while maintaining a happy household. Kathleen, a first grade teacher at a private school in Manhattan, said that there has been a significant shift. It's as if parents feel their children missed out on something and now want life to always feel special, with no disappointments. I haven't noticed an uptick in overly disruptive behavior, but more of a it's my world and everyone should revolve around me mentality. Where I used to see kids rolling with a paper cut, lately they need a band-aid now. Kids refuse to carry their backpacks and parents are more than happy to oblige them. Kids are less resilient, they don't know how to compromise. Parents of course have such a big role in the development of their children, but I didn't realize that the loved too much style of parenting could actually be so detrimental for your kids. The gentle parenting movement comes from a great place, and I've said it a million times, but it can be so good for you and your kids. But we now know that it can be pushed to the point where the power dynamic is flipped and the kids start running the show. So all of that is quite discouraging, to say the least. Like I said, I went into this cautiously, not wanting to make outrageous claims without strong evidence to back it. And strong evidence I found. I'm having a hard time trying to put a positive spin on this. I've realized that I kind of unintentionally do that in my final thoughts, is find a positive viewpoint to end on. And not because I'm an optimist, but because I think I need a little bit of hope. And I also want to give people the benefit of the doubt that we can be greater than these big claims. But there's so much compelling data showing that Gen Alpha really needs to fight for their life to not be harmed emotionally and mentally from just being born after 2009. I do and must still have hope. I have to, especially because my children are Gen Alpha. And everything that's been said about Gen Alpha is a generalized statement, not a claim for every child. For the parents who have been exposed to this information, whether through my videos or other resources, obviously, you have the power to change the narrative and spare your children's developing brains from the impacts of a technology-focused world. No other generation has grown up from birth with internet access, and this so-called guinea pig generation has been giving us warning signs that it's not working. We need to change our tactics, know when to be protective of our children, and know when to let them take the reins. Otherwise, if all these stars align of what we talked about today, I'm really worried we have a big problem on our hands.